What is up, folks? Welcome back to the Repertoire Podcast. My name is Justin Khanna. I almost wanted to call this a repertoire report. The couple similarities of my lovely co-host, Ray, being with me is one of those. But the second one was we didn't have the funds to quite yet sponsor the conference that we're going to be covering today. But I'm calling this, I guess, the Repertoire Report because I would love for someday for either Ray or myself or both of us or even some more team members to be like at a conference like MAD in Copenhagen, to be like boots on the ground covering some of this stuff live. I think that would be like a really cool way for the industry content that we're doing to kind of like take an in-person representation. So spoiler alert, that's what we're going to talk about today. I had the opportunity to attend MAD in Copenhagen, the 7th symposium that Renee Redzepi and the MAD team and that entire organization hosted. They haven't hosted one of these since 2018. And so it's been a very long time since this was able to get spun up and running again. I have notes across talking about the theme, how I felt about day one versus day two, the food that they served at the symposium, some of the talks that Renee Redzepi specifically kind of was a part of, the networking opportunities, as well as some takeaways that I took both from the talks as well as some of the breakout sessions. And so the way that we're going to kind of run this, obviously I have a full docket of notes that I'm going to run through. And then Ray, having not attended, I think is also going to interject at specific points, ask some follow-up questions. And then this can kind of be like a, I attended MAD, so you didn't have to type of episode. Not in a way there that I didn't enjoy the conference. I think you'll see by my feedback and the way that I talk about some of these elements that I really truly enjoyed myself. But it is one of those things that we talked about on the last episode Ray and I did, where it's expensive. It's a big time commitment. It is halfway across the world. And so there's a lot of that stuff that just made this, I say only 700 people. 700 people is a lot of people, but the way that they're also disseminating a lot of this content through video stuff and blog posts, you might have felt that you'll maybe only got a sliver of this on social media. And I can imagine there's probably going to publish a lot of the talks in full. But if there's additional context that I can provide here, I certainly want to do it. So Ray, thanks for being with me.
Yeah, to your point about remembering what to say, I have to always stop myself to say line cook thoughts before the podcast. No, I think this is going to be very interesting, Justin. I think because there hasn't been one in so long, if you could just share what it's like to attend one of these in terms of how do you get a ticket and what was the process like for you to actually get there? Because I think there's a lot of mystery or maybe just lack of knowledge on how you actually go to a MAD conference.
Yeah, great start. So taking it all the way back to when I heard about, I think, Renee and adjacent people launching MAD as kind of like a concept. And maybe a better place to start is like MAD, or I'm used to the word mat, so because I lived in Norway for 3 years. And so the Norwegian word for food is mat. So you'll say tak for maten at the end of a meal. Food in Danish is mad. And so that is kind of like the whole ethos around this is like things adjacent to food, whether that's business or production or farming or product development. All of that has kind of taken shape. And I did bring some props here, Ray, which we don't always have on these episodes. But I do have things like they do the MAD Academy, which is kind of like their version of like a hospitality school in the way of, doing workshops and seminars. And you can come in and take a program on food business or something like that is hosted by kind of like industry experts. And then they also have people who were like, I used to be a professor of XYZ thing at this university. MAD hired me, and now I teach this thing to anybody who wants to pay. And then they also do scholarships, and it is this kind of like, it does have this kind of like kumbaya feeling. I'll kind of talk about that when I talk about the breakout groups. But this is also just another arm of the kind of big umbrella that is like NOMA and NOMA projects. They did give us some of that merch, so you can see I have one of the NOMA projects. I'll just open this quickly so you can see, Ray, because I know you geek out about CPG stuff. This is like the mushroom garum, and this was in like one of the to-go bags or the goodie bags that they gave for attendees. They also gave the wild rose vinegar, and it's just, this is like one of the first iterations of NOMA Project's products that they're going to, I can imagine, have either as a thing you can get like at the airport going out of Copenhagen, and then they will maybe have larger versions of this in something like a grocery store. So I definitely want to maybe talk through a little bit of that as we go from there. But when that was first announced that Renee was doing this, because I had followed Renee, of course, as most chefs probably do here, it was one of those things where you could get on an email list to hear about the content that MAD was kind of putting out. And so when I was on that email list, I got one of the earlier applications to apply to MAD. I was, I think, either a chef de partie or a sous chef at the time. And I applied and my application didn't get accepted. But what I remember was my chef, Christopher Hatuft in Norway, he got to attend. And so he had attended several of these. And so that was kind of how I peripherally knew about MAD. And then, as I shared, it's been since 2018 because it kind of started to become like a big undertaking for them to put these on. Other people started to do conferences very similar to this, symposium style, TED style conferences. And so they kind of wound it down. Then the pandemic happened and it made it even harder for uncertainty reasons to commit to doing something like this. And so you get the email from MAD. Applications are open for the symposium. You have to go through not an extensive process, but it's like, what do you do in the industry? You know, those types of questions so that they can definitely curate who is at one of these conferences. I talk about what I do. I talk about my tenure in the food industry. And then you get that confirmation email that you have been accepted. You basically have like a limited time frame. I'm going to say something like 48 hours. Don't quote me on that. To purchase your ticket. That is not like just because you get accepted, you get an all expenses paid trip to go to Copenhagen. You have to pay your own way.
Yeah.
And then the ticket itself is, and I'm doing the conversion just from a currency perspective, it's something like $800 to go. And then, as you can see on some of these pamphlets that they include in the thing, they actually have a bunch of sponsors because, you know, this show is not sponsored by any of these brands, but these are like some pretty big food brands, Yeti, Blackbird, Longer Tables Fund from Jose Andres, and all of those companies ultimately end up putting more money in just to get both representation from all these industry people who are doing something in the industry. But then there's also this problem of like, and I'll get into this when we're talking about this stuff, like they have some of the biggest names in food doing the meals at some of this stuff. And you don't, quote unquote, have to pay for that as an attendee. Like it's included in the cost of your ticket. As another funny example, I'm going to a conference next week in Boise that's, you know, a like sponsored by an email marketing company that we use here at Repertoire. I have to pay for all my own meals there. You know what I mean? Like there's no meals included in that. And so, you know, the value prop is a little bit arguable, and I'll get into, you know, you can make your own decision at the end of this episode if that price tag is worth it. But I can also tell you that they need sponsors to put this on. Like this is not something where, you know, like they're quote unquote profiting off of MAD in any way, shape, or form. And I will also give a massive shout out to the team, both at MAD and at NOMA, because you know they worked the 5-day work week. You know there was lead up to this thing. And then I was like, on the first day, I was like, I wonder if I'm going to see anybody from NOMA here. And it's like almost the entire staff of NOMA is working the 2 days of the conference. And then they go right back into their 5-day work week. You know what I mean? Because the day after the conference ended on the Tuesday, the conference was Sunday, Monday. And then on Tuesday, I went to go eat at NOMA and they were just like open and running. You know what I mean? Just again, so you just go right back into it. So there's a ton of work to put this on. And so that's kind of the ethos of how to get there. Obviously the conference is 2 days. I showed up probably 36 hours before the conference happened. And then I stayed probably like 3-4 days after it. So I made up like a 6-day trip in total. I think that was a pretty good amount of time as kind of like a solo traveler. I had to get back to, you know, be with family and things. My wife was kind of solo parenting while I was away. And so that was just, I hope that answers the question of kind of like, how do you even like conceptualize this? It is obviously the application is one thing, but then you have to obviously pay your way to get there. And so it's not a cheap thing to go to something like this if you're not Copenhagen based.
I know you were going to leave it up to the listener to decide if this is worth it or not for them. Did you personally find it worth it?
The answer is yes, 100%. And there are elements where I think sometimes expectations get in the way. Sometimes I think I find myself, if it was culinary school, Justin, it would have been absolutely far and away. Yes, absolutely. As somebody who I'm developing my own ideas now, I'm not a quote unquote amateur in the industry. I think one of the youngest people there, this was like somebody's kid, I think, who was actually the youngest person there. But I did end up having the opportunity to talk to somebody who was like 21 years old, just had kind of like exited school and was in their first job as a chef de partie in LA, I want to say. And at that stage, I maybe don't know, you know, that is a little bit of a, are you a sponge and everything is interesting to you? I can actually take a look at, and I'm going to call it maybe harsh feedback on some of the talks in a way that maybe this wasn't necessary to include in the symposium. But overall, absolutely worth it, especially as someone who like, I don't get to do that much travel these days. And so being kind of like out there, boots on the ground, getting to engage with both the people and the brands and the food and the ideas that I follow from afar on the internet. You know what I mean? Like I in a lot of ways, just see these people through Instagram all year. And so being able to actually like talk to them in person is like, there's no replacement for that. And so from that sense, it's like, and what can you leverage it into in the future? I think if you position one of these not as a leech, like you're going to this conference to like I want to close deals while I'm in the audience at any of these things, but I think you can realize that as I go through some of these takeaways that like it was absolutely worth it to go.
And do you find that, I mean, you're obviously not in restaurants currently, so I think that even speaks more to the value of it. Obviously, someone in a restaurant space would find value in it. You found, though, just being in food business in general, that it was useful.
Yeah, and when I get into talking about some of the speakers, like the founder of Patagonia was one of the speakers. There's just people who have written books on, like the future of kind of like humanity, looking at, there was two speakers who have like a business that's called the Future Library, where they're basically have like 100-year-long library that they're kind of like building. And so you get insights on food, but then you also get these like more macro ideas on sustainability or just kind of like future focused thinking. And maybe that's where I'll maybe start, is by talking about the theme of this year's symposium, which was build to last. And I'm saying that very enunciated because it's build, B-U-I-L-D, not T, to last. And I thought that was so interesting in seeing that. And that's maybe my first takeaway, which is when I hear that, I think of Built to Last, which for those that don't know is a very famous Jim Collins book about entrepreneurship and business. And what was so interesting for me to see, I kind of paused myself first and I was like, is this a Danish language problem? Because you heard people on stage and they would actually mess it up. They would say, I want to really focus my talk on this idea of being built to last. And they would say it built to last, but it's build to last. And I think what was so striking for me to hear with that theme is that book is all about this countervailing force between being built to sell. And so it's this idea of, I don't want to quickly get to a certain revenue number or a certain number of users on my app or any other metric that you might measure on a dashboard, so that I can shop my business around and make a quick exit. And sure, if things are messy behind the scenes, or if I leave a bunch of disgruntled employees in my wake, or if I have really poorly negotiated contracts, or maybe I'm really not that profitable and I'm only quote unquote profitable on paper because I took a bunch of money from investors, who cares? Because I can sell my business at a multiple for whatever my revenue happens to be at the time, or projection for where my business is going to grow in the future. And then who cares? I don't need to be worried about lasting, quote unquote. I don't have to have any infrastructure. I don't have to worry about my operations because I'm going to build this to sell it. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and said, okay, this idea of being built to last, i.e. in the Jim Collins way, was very interesting. And he talks in that book about certain businesses who maybe got offers from people to buy their company. And they said, no, we actually want to retain ownership here. And all of the qualms and trials and tribulations that you have to go through when you bring in investors and you're having to give up control and you're maybe having to have some of these sleepless nights where you're trying to go so quickly because in that kind of VC funded, we only have so much runway left before we run out of money, or we need to prove profitability really, really quickly. It leads to a lot of that short-term behavior. And so the way that I kind of saw it in my head is the MAD build to last and the Jim Collins built to last Venn diagram in some ways, in the sense of long-term behavior versus short-term behavior, wanting to make sure that you don't burn out in your business. All of that stuff I think was just kind of interesting, but it was this interesting principle of, I don't know if people have read this book. You know what I mean? Like I tried to bring it up to a couple of people at the conference and they're like, oh, I wasn't aware that was a concept. And so the big thing that I took away from that was restaurants, and you look at some of the adjacent businesses that were represented at the symposium, farms, wineries, none of these businesses get acquired. I mean, very rare, I'm sure the listener can think of maybe one exception that they're going to send us in an Instagram comment. But for the most part, restaurants don't get built to merge with other restaurants in the future. Yeah. There is no like Google, quote unquote, that's just buying up restaurants when they get successful. I think one of the more telling examples of this that maybe does mirror is like microbreweries. There's like a big trend of like Anheuser-Busch, I think is one of the bigger ones that, the second you reach a critical mass or level of popularity with your brewery, you're going to get an offer to quote unquote sell. Restaurants in the more traditional sense, nobody's going to put an offer to acquire Noma. It ends up being this thing where you start to build on Noma's IP and the brand that they have in the greater space. And so that was just the bigger thing that I drew from the theme was there's some things that definitely cross over, but there's some things that you need to kind of be careful of and make sure that it's not build to last as opposed to build to sell. It is build to last and just don't do crappy business practices. I think that was maybe the core first takeaway from just the theme overall.
Last, I think that is an interesting viewpoint for sure. I kind of ran into that issue with restaurants. I think that was a major driver for me, considering what else is outside of restaurants, is the idea that you could grow a restaurant business to its fullest potential like Noma, but then like what's that next step? You're either franchising out, you're doing multiple locations. So I think for me, like what drives me passionately is like at scale, making good food, making good products. That's just my own personal development. So it's interesting that like you take that viewpoint and kind of this idea of building these restaurants out. I spoke about this recently that we have this new generation of cooks coming in, National Restaurant Association saying that, you know, this is going to be the biggest hiring period for the prime age group for people going into the industry since 2008. So just keeping that in mind, this is a very relevant topic to what we've discussed in the last show while you were gone.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, definitely a very good takeaway to start with.
So the way that the symposium was structured, and I'm going to kind of show this in the pamphlet or the brochure for both days, was each day had a focus. And so the first day was, where are we coming from? Basically this idea of what has come before us. And that was the focus on each of the curated speakers and the talks that they decided to do and the subjects of their talks in general. And then the next one was, where are we going? And so just to quickly read for you an excerpt from the second day's brochure. Quote, if yesterday was about asking what we want to keep from our past and what we're ready to let go of, which is an important thing that, again, this is my aside, that they did talk about, which I'm going to get into. I'm going back into the quote, today is about imagining the future we want to see and hear. We'll be talking about how to think long-term, how to have an impact, how to live our values, and how to transform vision into reality. And so that is my first kind of like qualm with the 2 days, comparing day one versus day two. Day one for me was a little lackluster when I put it in relation to day two.
Okay.
Maybe that's my optimism brain. Maybe that's the way that I'm so future focused. But day one, and I will give some key examples in some of the talks, felt like what I'm calling like a pitch of here's what our company does. And this went across restaurants and nonprofits and all these sorts of things. And the talks were effectively a bunch of these like rhetorical questions that didn't really offer solutions.
Okay.
And so
and real quick, just to clarify for listeners, when you say here's what our company does, what is the point of view? Is that a general business or is that from Noma's point of view?
That is, this person from the company is up on stage giving a talk and the slides behind them are basically like, here's what our company does.
So literally whoever was speaking.
Exactly. Exactly. And so maybe this is more of a criticism of the subject of the talks and the way that maybe the person was structuring things or how they got coached, if they got coaching at all, into how to give one of these speeches. And so I have a couple examples that I wanted to bring. So had the immense opportunity of sitting across from Mickey, who is this gentleman who helps to run an organization called Ben's Friends. And it is a addiction company inside of hospitality. So he was in restaurants for a really, really long time, struggled with addiction himself. And now he runs this organization that has a bunch of, I'm going to call them chapters throughout the US. I think they're maybe global now, where his whole pitch was like, we solve addiction through community. And he told his story of, it was really kind of like striking to hear him talk about, finding himself in hotel rooms after a shift and struggling with addiction and really neglecting his health and how that affected his family. And so he kind of like really brings you in with this story. And you would think that there would kind of be like this takeaway or some actionable insights that we as a bunch of leaders in the industry can use to kind of like take away from this conference. But it was in the end, or at least the way that I perceived it, it was like, and here's where to find more information about our company. And it's like, I'm not saying that I want him to give all the information for free, but structure the talk in a way that it is like story, at least in the beginning. And then here are some things that you as leaders can do in your organization a little bit more. And again, I sat across from this guy in lunch. And so we talked, became friends. We have each other's numbers. I respect the guy a lot. But there was this moment of just kind of like, I wanted him, because he does such good work, because I think that there is such an impact that he could have had in the room. I just felt like it was maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity. And it again felt more like a pitch for this is Ben's Friends, where, we all got his information in the brochures. Like, we know how to contact you. And when you give such a good talk, we're going to follow you anyways.
Yeah.
But to have the talk structure in that way, I left wanting more from that specific talk. And the other one that, again, was like so interesting to actually see in front of my own eyes was, do you remember that chef in 2003 who committed suicide, Bernard Loiseau?
Mm-hmm.
He was the guy who worked his way up to 3 Michelin stars. Yeah. Famously, that is the only thing he cared about. And there was rumors of his stars potentially getting taken away, and he unfortunately committed suicide with that knowledge. And so those that might not know, his wife, and then he has 2 daughters, and he has other children too. They're not involved in the industry. His family has kind of taken the mantle up and continued to run those businesses and expand the number of businesses that they have in France even further, even beyond France, if I'm not mistaken. And their talk, all of us are sitting there and like, we all know that story. We all know that he tragically committed suicide. But what it felt like, and again, I'm talking about like subjective one-of-one experience here. They're showing like these beautiful visions of their dining room and the food that they do, and look at us posing with our headshots and we run the business now, versus, and I'm even trying to give some flowers here, the talk right after that was Justin Selk of Anna Jack Thai in LA, and his talk, if I'm not mistaken, was titled something like How to Take Over Your Parents' Restaurant, something like that, in this like very funny, do you know what I mean, like almost tongue-in-cheek kind of way. And his talk was my favorite talk of day one, because it was this kind of like, he told a lot of stories. He told the trials and tribulations. He told some of the insights on like, I actually had to reject what my parents wanted, and I had to kind of make these decisions on my own, and that was really hard. If you end up doing something like this for yourself, here's what I recommend. I found that to be much more insightful than, again, almost like this pitch of, look at how successful we are, quote unquote, on paper after having this tragic thing happen. And I'm really trying to provide some nuance here, because of course, like, I'm never going to know what it's like to have a father that, you know, is that obsessive and tragically lost his life in that way. But that's what day one felt like. And then I counter it with day two, which was again, like a lot more optimism focused. My favorite talk, just to cut to the chase, on day two was a chef named Josh Nealand out of Australia. He runs a place called Fish Butchery, and then he has a couple of other concepts.
He has the very popular, what's the cookbook?
Yeah. St. Peter, I think, is what it's...
No, it's like the whole...
whole Fish Butchery. Fish Butchery, I think, is maybe what it's called. And the reason that it stood out to me was twofold. One, I thought it was so interesting that he gets up on stage, and he's got the table in front of him, and it has the entire butchered fish in front of him, very similar to what you've seen him probably post on Instagram. All of the parts, all of the individual bones removed, all of the organs, the skin, the eyes, the gills, everything just kind of like taken apart and strewn across the table. And everybody thinks he's going to talk about butchery. Very similar to what, you know, I think kind of talking about the Bernard Lassau's family. It's like, we think you're going to talk about the restaurant, but you could have pulled like this really cool like bait and switch and told us this really surprising thing. But instead, you just kind of like pitch what you do. All of us kind of know that. Josh, as a contrast to that, he says something to the effect of opening the talk saying, "My name is Josh. This is what I do. I obviously do all of this work respecting this beautiful product that comes into the restaurant. But I want to talk about something else." And just to give you and I kind of like a little bit of a pat on the back, Ray, he goes, "I listened to a really interesting podcast, and I had a takeaway that I now use in my business that completely changed how I run things." And he shared this very vulnerable moment of like, I got really down to the point where I didn't go into my restaurant for 6 weeks. He was like that mentally unwell about the state of things. And this might be hyperbole just for the talk, but regardless, he goes, "I listened to this business podcast and they gave me this framework that I now use across all of my hiring, across all my key decisions that I'm making, and even to analyze myself about where I can fit into the business in the most helpful way, where I'm not putting the burden exclusively on myself." And so the MAD organization is going to put out the entire talk. I don't want to probably paraphrase too much or discredit Josh in any way, but you can probably Google it yourself. It's this framework called the Widget Framework, UIDGET. Or IT. I might have written that wrong. I think it's ET. It's definitely ET. Or maybe it is IT. I'm getting myself messed up here.
Yep.
And that was so striking to me, because it was this moment of, we're all here. We all can kind of have this incestuous relationship of, we all run similar businesses, at least on the restaurant side, maybe. And it's kind of like, it becomes this insular echo chamber. And sometimes the value comes from being outside of the space. And the value you can have from exiting your bubble, getting some insights from elsewhere and bringing them back, I think is a big thing that we do here, which was really, really cool to see exemplified in somebody who is so high profile as Josh. But it was almost this kind of like tongue-in-cheek way of like, you know me for this, you know me for the fish butchery. It's literally on the table in front of him. He did the thing, the quote unquote act. He did the main thing. He did the magic trick.
Yeah.
But he's like, I have much more important things to talk about here. And that's why that was just kind of so satisfying for me to hear and see. And again, I just really commend him for again, being vulnerable and doing that in front of a crowd of just like so many other industry people.
Yeah, so it sounds like for me, like your feedback, their initial talks were more so like a general pitch of what their business is. And I think that's interesting compared to like actually a topic at hand. So I guess I understand the pitch if it's a symposium of being built to last. I can understand pitching the business, but then obviously that bait and switch of like what's the deeper level or layer to how that works, I think is obviously I would pull more from that as well.
Exactly. And I kind of felt the same. I wasn't the only one who felt that way. I think there was a lot of like side conversations that we had after the talks where it was this feeling of not like it's not worth it to be here on day one, but it's just like this craving of like, I want a little bit more here. Like I want more. And I think for better or for worse, the nice part about these gatherings of people, especially like-minded people, is that those conversations end up happening anyways. So if you're disappointed in the speakers, you go to lunch and you ultimately have a more engaging conversation with the people that are next to you because you're, again, craving more, and that pushes you almost to speak up at the table and have that conversation with somebody. And so you get that itch scratched regardless, but it is this, you get up on stage and you have this opportunity, and I'm almost like, don't squander it. Like you'll already talk about this on social media. This is already on your about page. We don't need to hear this type of pitch all over again.
I'm
talking about lunch,
for myself,
that does
obviously
flow
given
into my next topic, which is, go ahead.
I was gonna say, given the situation that family is in, and given how renowned Noma has been, was there any conversation around that pursuit of perfection? Was that ever brought up at a conference such as this? Like the perils that can lead to?
I saw a couple of posts on Instagram from people who have worked at Noma when all of this stuff about MAD is getting posted and everybody's sharing and putting it on their stories. There were people that came out of the woodwork that were talking about like, hey, Noma's saying, build to last, talking about industry future, all of this stuff. And then you also simultaneously were this organization that was kind of like, quote unquote, built on the backs of stagiaires and unpaid labor and all these sorts of things. Just as a very quick aside to all of that, to kind of not squash it, but just like address it directly. I, again, had the opportunity to eat at Noma on the Tuesday, the day after the symposium happened.
Yeah.
And one of my biggest takeaways from the meal there, which I'm sure I will cover in a future podcast episode, or if I should, I shot a going out to eat video on the meal. When that gets put out is TBD, so I'll say it here. The food at Noma is very different now, in my opinion. Being someone who has staged there, and then I ate there in 2014, 2015, and now I've eaten there again almost 10 years later. And food is not as labor. Obviously, there's labor involved.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, and without knowing the exact operational back end of how Noma works now, a lot of the work is in the well in advance pre-work is maybe the better thing to say. Yeah. So the service pieces that things are served on, the fermented projects, and maybe the processing that happens to the stuff that comes in, it is not in, we need 16 people to plate this individual course. The food is way, way, way different from that. So the a la minute requirement for labor is far, far, far different from Noma in the way that, in my opinion, it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to say this in a gentle way, but it is like the food is different.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. The food is like, it's not as intricate. It's not as like the individual knife cuts or the shingling of things on plates is like, it's just not present anymore.
Yeah.
It is things almost like very nice, high quality stuff assembled on a plate in a way that is like, yes, this is 3-month-old XYZ fermented, cured thing that we have, but it's not obsessive with the way that it is like laid out on the plate where, again, look at the army that built this for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that sense, you cannot point to Noma now and say you are a restaurant that is built on the backs of, quote unquote, do you know what I mean? Unpaid. And Renee even talks about this, how people are paid in a way now that, obviously he has his own feelings about how he ran his business previously. And so you have, again, like these people who have openly come out on it. I don't know if there's maybe a PR situation where Renee is or is not talking about some of these issues, but I can tell you for having just eaten there last week, those practices are not happening at Noma anymore. And it has affected the food. In a good or bad way, that's debatable. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like you can still achieve deliciousness through some of these other processes that they try to prioritize, but it does turn into this like shock value factor when you ultimately do have the dish presented in front of you. It is not the same Noma experience that it was before. Is that good or bad? Do you know what I mean? Like I think back to like that meal that I had in 10 years ago, and you look at the thing that is just presented to you and it's like, oh my God, that's insane. It's insane that they did that. Did I have as many of those moments at this most recent Noma meal? No. But is that a good or a bad thing? It is like this thing that I've been kind of like tussling with in my brain. And I do think that there is a congruence there between what Noma is actually doing. And again, if there's anybody who's working at Noma, staging at Noma, managing at Noma who has something else to say, please, please, please let us know. We'd love to have you come on the show and give us some insights there. But again, this is like N of one, what my experience was like having just been there.
Yeah, and I think I trust your word on it in a sense, because I'm very much programmed to rail against a restaurant like Noma. The whole idea of line cook thoughts was to kind of highlight those that are maybe lesser seen in the industry. And so I've made my feelings abundantly clear on kind of the direction of that food and kind of where that all sits. I know when we discussed Noma, it was one of our best performing podcasts was the news when Noma kind of shared they were closing because they couldn't hack it anymore. So I do have some cynicism built in towards Noma as a restaurant in terms of how their food has been presented, but without that firsthand knowledge, I've been nothing more than a cynic of it, but not really trying to be as critical because I've never worked for them. I've never had to, been able to dine with them. So hearing all of that, it's like good to see that the food at least has progressed from something that is very unmanageable in a sense without high labor expectations to something that is more manageable. And to your point, being like less of a, wow, an army built this and more of a thoughtful dish that has been built over time. So I do think that is an interesting takeaway for those who maybe are railing against the idea of Noma, which I know there are many of. And I read those, I saw those comments too. And so I think that's why I asked, is just like, it's a general interest of like, in a model that could be so fraught with a lack of sustainability, how they were able to kind of manage that within their own
100%. And I that's why you're here, like to again provide not just pushback, but again like the, hey, have we thought about this, or did anybody mention that? Because it is one of those funny things where I sought out Noma as a place to go stage because I wanted to be pushed, not necessarily because I wanted to work for free for 2 years. Like I wanted to see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The value that I got from being there was much more in an insight into the environment, more so than, again, like being exploited for years at a time. And so again, it is kind of a to each their own situation. But yeah, you're right. We'd be remiss if we didn't at least bring up the fact that is Noma actually living by some of these things. Mm-hmm. And you go through the new Noma space. I got a chance to tour just kind of like the back end situation, and there's an entire kitchen just dedicated to the staff. Like it is like almost like there's a combi oven, there's a big countertop to like plate stuff, and like there's a big place for staff to eat. Like they don't eat like sitting on milk crates in the back, you know what I mean? In the way that like they actually get a proper table to sit and have staff food. And so like there's a lot of good things that have just kind of been infused into this new iteration of the space. Yeah, the hours are still probably hella long. As I shared at the top of this episode, they had to do the work to not just do the restaurant, but then also help with the symposium. And so there's a little bit of that also kind of feeds into it, which kind of leads me into the next topic that I wanted to cover, which is like the food at this food symposium. You're going to this place where you're feeding some of the best chefs in the world, like Thomas Keller and Jose Andres are in attendance. What are you going to serve them when they come to this symposium that is in large respects out on an island? Like it is like you have to take a boat to get to this place. It's on like this plot of land that is not, like you're not in the back. You don't have Noma as the prep kitchen or any other friend's restaurant to kind of like prep out of. It is a tent. It is a tent, and it is rented equipment, and they had to feed 700 people breakfast and lunch across 2 days. And I will say, bar none, best food at a conference, large event, wedding, anything I've ever been able to experience. Yeah. And so the first day, pastries and breakfast are provided by Heart Bakery, which was like, awesome. To just because like you see it on the bear, it is this kind of like institution in Copenhagen now, and they provided, and that is just a testament to like Renee's network and the kind of like people in the orbit of MAD. Lunch was Anajak Thai, which is insane that you can serve that food to 700 people. The coffee was through a bunch of different companies. The two more notable that people might be familiar with is a company called La Cabra, as well as Tim Wendelbo, which are just like insane small batch, places. They had like espresso machines inside of the tent where you could order a cortado if you wanted, or you can do like these really small batch, kind of like pour overs in the tent. So like quality of stuff was incredible. And the way that, again, some of these people thought about, to the thing that I was talking about earlier, it was not a situation of we need to have perfectly plated everything for 700 people, and so we need to hire 1,000 people to staff this event. It was very operationally minded culinarians that came up with the way that these menus were going to flow. And so on day 2, breakfast was from Hija de Sanchez and Rosio Sanchez's team. And lunch was from St. John in London. And they served from the St. John. It was absolutely insane to see the execution of the St. John menu because it was like bone marrow with toast and the parsley salad for 700 freaking people. And the meat pie, like these huge meat pies on the table, and the vegetable salads. And the dessert was like these little pastries stuffed with like raisins and cinnamon and like these big blocks of cheese. Like that, you know, like you felt like feasting at this symposium in the middle of a tent in, quite honestly, the middle of nowhere. And my takeaway from that was like sourcing really good partners really matters. That was also a reason that this event was in no way profitable off of just the sales of the tickets.
Yeah.
But I think one of the other big takeaways is like, I have this story that I tell about this chef de partie that I worked with at Per Se. And the TLDR of that story is he always told me that at a 3-star Michelin level or at a fine dining level, whatever level you happen to achieve in your career, you can always go kind of like to more casual operations or bigger scale or, you know, less complex, you know, organizations, but you can't always go back to like the more intricate style stuff. And that was such a testament to it, which is like Noma can do 3-star Michelin food, but they can also cater an event for 700 people. Because like they brought in additional staff, but for the most part, the people who were in the kitchen doing the meals for MAD was the team at Noma. And you look at some of the behind the scenes and the way that they set up in the back, how everything was operationally set up. It was a well-oiled machine. It was incredible. And so that was for anybody who's thinking about like, well, I have this question of in my career, do I go to the fine dining route or do I go this more, you know, do I go work for this catering company? Because yeah, maybe they pay really, really well. You will get takeaways from working at some of these, again, really high caliber organizations that you can bring to maybe a more casual place later on in your career. And the range that you get when you can think about, again, just like working clean, really tight, precision, speed, the way you move, the way that the whole team is kind of like functioning together. Again, it is just such a testament to like the quality of the people in the organization there. And so the food, again, was just incredibly, incredibly impressive. And so I just want to give a shout out to that.
When it comes to who's at this conference, who did you recognize? Who were you surprised to see regarding chefs that are maybe more well known to the audience?
Yeah,
that you knew personally?
Yeah. So a friend of the show, he's been on the show. Christian Puglisi was there. The whole team from The Bear basically was there. Maddie Matheson, Courtney Storer, obviously a friend. Got to say hi to her. Will, who plays the other, you know, Carmen's kind of like quote unquote nemesis from the show. It was there. Got to take a picture with him. A bunch of people who follow the show. So shout out if you came up and said hi. Thank you for, you know, coming up and saying hi. The team from Silo in the UK, if you're familiar with them, they're like a famously no waste restaurant. Obviously, a lot of the speakers through like Thomas Keller and getting to give Jose Andres a hug. I'm even looking through like, what is his name? Angel Leon. Also, I think had a Chef's Table episode. He's this gentleman from Spain who has this really ambitious plan to create this like restaurant that almost has these like sea inlets that they're growing like sea vegetables in. And they're kind of doing this really fascinating process with fish, with like charcuterie and just this really cool way of treating products from the ocean. And so it is this situation where you go to a conference that is this size. I'm going to another one next week that is a completely different audience, but it's one of the reasons that I go to that one is because the audience is small enough where if you go to a conference that has 10,000 people, that person, after they get off stage, is getting taken to a green room, and then they're getting taken to a car, and then they're getting taken back to their hotel, or they're getting taken to the next party or whatever it happens to be. When it's, I'm going to call it like less than 1,000 people, less than 800 people, that person just got off stage and they're going to go into the audience and they're going to go to the get a cup of coffee at the same coffee place that you're getting coffee from right after. And so you have this beautiful opportunity to just speak with the people who are, again, titans in the industry. Or again, to the point of me sitting across from lunch on this person who runs this incredible organization that's talking about addiction and hospitality. It's just really cool to be in that proximity, in that context. And you've proven yourself to be an interesting person by proxy of you showing up at the conference yourself. And so it is this like, you don't have to worry about like proving yourself to the person. You can almost just get right into a conversation and network with that person. That is another bullet point that I want to get into, but I want to make sure you got all your questions answered. But yeah, there was a lot of really cool, and of course, like the Noma folks, like the Chef de Cuisine Noma is a dear friend. There's another gentleman who's just coming off of a stint in Tokyo named Coleman. I think Griffin is his last name, and he is involved in Noma now. Renee being there, Ariel from the Flavor book, the Flavor I don't exactly have the title of her book. It's somewhere on my shelf here. But yeah, man, there's like, it's not like every single person was there, but it was this cool combination of like super familiar faces that you see on Instagram. And then these people who like, there's this funny, like, I didn't get a chance to talk to them because I one, didn't have time. And two, I don't think I felt that comfortable. Chef Andoni from Mugaritz, Andoni Aduriz from Mugaritz. He also has like famously this guy who is quote unquote like the brains of Mugaritz. And he's just a guy who's just like, looks like kind of a nerd and just has this big beard and he's just wearing a hat, just looks like a normal guy. But I was talking to another friend of the show who's there, Eneko Achbe, who's a gastrophysicist. And him and I were chatting and he's be like, oh, you need to go like talk to Andoni because his guy is here and he's like one of the most creative minds in food and he just like happens to be here. And so I don't know, it was interesting for me to like who I wanted to connect with at the conference because I less wanted to talk to chefs and I more wanted to talk to entrepreneurs or people who are in food media just because that's kind of like more of the space that I want to play in now. I think, again, 5-10 years ago, I would have totally geeked out about like, oh my God, I need to have a picture with Andoni right now. I was like maybe a little bit less stoked on that. And also my old chef from Norway was there in attendance. And then the general manager of that restaurant, who was my roommate for 7 years, was also there. And so I was like spending a lot of time with like old friends. And so that was also maybe a proxy of like, if I was there just myself, I would have, you know, maybe done things a little bit differently.
So thank you for sharing that.
So the next kind of point that I want to just share on the topic of small scale events, be in the rooms where some of these people are. The networking was amazing. And so I want to talk about networking for a hot second and the value of thinking about networking and people and relationships in the context of your career. And so the first one was this really cool benefit that I got as an event attendee was, as I shared, I haven't been to Copenhagen in a long time. I've been wanting to go to a lot of these places for a really long time, but I got to save a bunch of time by going to MAD. Because as an example, I went to eat at this tasting menu place the first night that I was in Copenhagen. And the chef de cuisine there and I were talking and I asked for some recommendations from her. And she's like, oh, you need to go to this pizza place called Diamond Slice. And I start looking at the brochure and because I put it on my Google map list, I was like, okay, I'm going to make sure I go here. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, Diamond Slice is the one doing the pizza at the after party for MAD. And it's like, so sweet. I don't have to go to Diamond Slice myself. I don't have to bike across the city and go to this place. Same thing with Heart Bakery doing the pastries for breakfast on the first day. I had 4 or 5 or 6 bakeries on my list. I got to do almost all of them because one of the mornings I didn't have to do Heart and I got to do Anderson and Maillard or Juno instead. And so that was just an incredible like time saver because it's almost like all this stuff is condensed and packed into this one little area. You don't have to bop around to all these little places. It's almost like it saves you time and you can engage with these organizations and these brands. Tim Wendelbo's there pouring coffee. Like if you're a coffee person, like he's one of the most interesting people to kind of know and speak with. Same thing with, I kind of mentioned this already, but I had it in my notes, sitting across from Mickey from Ben's Friends. You just, again, serendipity is such a cool factor at some of these conferences. It's the little stuff like standing in line to go to the restroom or just like you're waiting to get a coffee or you bump into somebody in line for one thing. And it's like you get to talking. And if you're willing to kind of put yourself out there, it is so valuable. So that is in the short term when you're at the conference. That is really, really cool. And the other one that really came kind of like rushing through me as I was at this conference was the value of long-term relationships across your career. And so as an example, the chef de cuisine of Noma, head chef at Noma, his name's Pablo Soto. He was a stagiaire at Grace when I was a chef de partie there. That was in 2012. It's been 13 years since I've seen that guy. And I see him and I give him a big hug and we talk like we just hung out last weekend.
Yeah.
And it is like, we're not like the best of friends or anything, but it is the situation of like the short-term behavior, burning bridges, saying that you don't need anybody, being quote unquote, like, I want to be self-made, give the middle finger to people that were at your old location. I'm moving on to the next restaurant. Therefore, I don't need you. I'm going to be an asshole at the restaurant we're working at now so I can get ahead and look good to the manager so I get the promotion and not you. Same thing with Coleman. Like Coleman is this incredibly talented chef who was at the restaurant at Meadowood when I was at the French Laundry. Like we haven't seen each other in over 10 years. But we see each other, we followed each other on Instagram, we follow each other on Facebook, and now all of a sudden we see each other in person and it's like, hey, let's catch up. And so the value of this, I just cannot understate because MAD, when it quote unquote stopped running in 2018, that could have been the end of it. There could have been no more MAD. I had no way to forecast that in 2025, I would be in Copenhagen for the 7th MAD Symposium. But when it is time to do something like that for yourself, whether you go to the conference or you start a podcast of your own, or you decide to start to raise money for your restaurants, it does turn into this situation where your network matters. And so if you're early on in your career and you're like, I don't know anybody, I'm a nobody. it's like that way of thinking, I don't think it serves you. And just being like a kind human being, looking at these things as relationships that will last across your entire career, it is just like the proof was so there for me. Like I lived that this past week. Being able to like message again, this guy who came in as like a food photographer at a event that I did as a guest chef dinner in Oslo is now Anders Husa, one of the more prolific, like food bloggers with his wife, Caitlin. Them messaging me to get a chef seat counter at Alouette for my first night in Copenhagen. It's like that never would have happened had I not had that relationship.
Yeah.
And so that is one of those situations of just really wanting to make sure that if you're the type of person who thinks, I turn off this podcast, right? I don't know if you're the same way, but like, I don't talk to anybody else after that. Like, I'm an introvert, true and true. Like, you see me talking videos, you see me talking the podcast, you see me put out newsletter stuff, see me on Instagram. And it's like, it might sound like I'm talking a lot, but I'm really like a homebody. I'm really pretty quiet. I really like one-on-one conversations in small group environments. I don't like being the life of the party. And so if I can do it, you can do it is kind of like the lesson that I hope, comes across to the listener, and keeping these things as something that you actually prioritize. And maybe the way to think about it is you don't even have to prioritize them. Just don't fuck them up.
Yeah.
Just don't be the type of person who's going to like leave people in your wake is, in my opinion, a really good way to move about your career.
Even just life in general. I mean,
life in
for
general.
myself, just real quick, because yesterday I was out fishing. I live in the Naperville region of Illinois, and this lady's with a camera, and she's out there, and she's like, "Oh, you catch anything?" "No, it's kind of a crappy day of fishing." Turns out she's the she's owner or editor of Positively Naperville. It's a local Naperville publication. I said, "If you need a food writer, I'm here." This is more so of a way to just get my writing out there, get more ingrained with the local restaurant scene, which I've been wanting to do. Perfect opportunity to do so, flex my writing, learn about the restaurant scene in Naperville, like Chicago suburb region, all because I was just open to saying hi to someone on a bridge that I was fishing off of on a Sunday afternoon. So it's like, you never know. And that relationship is going to be good for if I ever end up writing for them, just for writing and learning more about my community and wherever those relationships take you. But just being open to saying hi to someone can drastically alter your day and what you're focused on. So.
Yeah. And maybe the other actionable takeaway, in addition to what you're saying, just have the gusto to go up and say hi.
Mm-hmm.
But then it doesn't have to be this like how to win friends and influence people. Like you need to win them over and get something from them type of thing. But do something in a way where it allows you to stay connected to that person. The problems that we see with being online, I think, are vast, and Ray and I have covered those before. But one of the benefits is like you don't have to see someone every single weekend to continue to have a relationship with them if you can manage to follow them online in some way, shape, or form. Because when the time comes when you're going to South Africa and you all of a sudden want to know like, hey, where do I need to go eat? That's the message you can send. That's the person you can connect with. And it's one of those things where when you're finally in person at something like this, you get the opportunity to actually leverage is even the wrong word. Like I hazard to say the word leverage because it sounds like I'm being extractive, but you can actually make it go deeper than just, I know this person. And so it's just a huge benefit that you on paper can guarantee that you're going to see all of these people speak when you go to MAD. What is not in this brochure, in this pamphlet, and what I cannot guarantee is the conversations you're going to have and the people that you're going to meet and the spontaneous connections that you're going to walk away with. And that is, again, one of the biggest reasons that I go to one of these things, and really brings it back to one of your first points of, was it worth it? Yes, like that ends up making it worth it. And it is because you enter the event with this posture that I'm here to kind of like make positive relationships. And that ends up working out 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10 for me.
Awesome
and so
to hear.
That's networking. The other like small criticism that, again, I just want to say, not in a dunking kind of way, but in a, I felt this way, I heard side conversations of people mirroring this, was this idea of Renee having fireside chats. It happened twice. So it happened on day 1, Thomas Keller came up on stage and sat with Renee and they had a talk. And then on day 2, Jose Andres came and chatted, and Renee and him chatted. Couple takeaways from that. The first one is Thomas Keller made himself incredibly unrelatable when he went up on stage, and he made this anecdote about sleep, diet, and exercise are like the 3 important things to prioritize in yourself. And it was this effect that you hear other founders talk about when the founder exits their company for $100 million, then they come on stage and they talk about their 2-hour morning routine that they do. And it was just totally that meme, basically like exemplified on stage. And with Chef Keller's talk in particular, and the listener has to know, like, I have so much respect for Chef Keller. Like, I'm doing a deep dive research session on a podcast on his business
Yeah.
in general. So, like, I'm trying to keep this kind of like cohesive and respectful. But even Renee, and I hope they put this talk out, because it's like there were moments where I could just tell that Renee was just trying to push him to like be a person. Like, I want to know, like, show me some vulnerability, similar to what I talked about with Josh Nealand talking about on stage. And Chef Keller just kept defaulting to his canned responses, to his canned, you know, like, this is what I said on the Chef's Table episode. This is what I say in all of my interviews. And so I'm just going to say the same thing here to you.
Yeah.
Well, we cook to nurture people. Do you know what I mean? He just defaults to that every single time.
Yeah.
And Renee would stop and he would pause and he would like he would try to talk to him. And so it's like, as an interviewer myself, I understand there's a dynamic where you have to make sure that your guest is comfortable, but at the same time, you have to try to make it interesting for the listener. And to me, that just fell completely flat. And it was like one of the later talks on day one. And it just kind of cemented this feeling of just like, man, I wanted more from that. Like, you get the chance to have Thomas Keller sitting across from you, which, being honest, that is, for Renee and for MAD, that is the win in and of itself. You got Thomas Keller to fly to Copenhagen to come to your symposium. Yeah. That is, like, from an ROI perspective, I don't know if there was money that exchanged hands or whatever. I don't even think it matters. But it is this funny thing where, like, who cares what he said in the talk? There are pictures that people are posting on Instagram of, like, Thomas Keller came to MAD. That is like an endorsement in and of itself. Yeah. And maybe even more importantly, like, he came for both days. And that, I think, is like interesting, of like a lot of these speakers, sometimes they'll just come for one day and they're like, oh, well, you know, that was my obligation, but he came for both days. And so I don't know, maybe there was a genuine interest there. And then same with Jose Andres. Like, again, I really hope they post this talk because it was so funny. Renee, his first question he asked Jose when he came on stage was, Jose, how do you do it? You're starting restaurants, you're feeding people in Ukraine, you're politically advocating for all of these things. How do you keep up with all of this work that you're doing? The stamina, the focus, the multiple projects, you're a dad. How do you do it? And Jose just like went on this long diatribe of this unrelated topic of this thing. And then Renee would say, okay, again, I'm going to ask again, how do you do it? And that was almost like it became a meme during the fireside chat because Jose just like soapboxed for like an hour going and talking about all this stuff. And he got super vulnerable. Do you know what I mean? Like towards the end of the conversation, talking about like he's scared, he's afraid, he operates from this place of like, I don't want anything bad to happen. So from that sense, like that was a little bit more satisfying than Chef Keller because he did actually get vulnerable. But it was, again, this point of like, we got Jose Andres to come to our conference and nobody's ever going to say that. But it was this like, did Jose Andres give, you know, like the best fireside chat, you know, and was Renee maybe the best moderator for it? I don't necessarily know. And so those were like two things where I definitely liked Jose Andres's fireside chat better. Thomas Keller's was just like, and it's hard because I've been following Chef Keller for so long that I came in with the expectation that he would do that. And I wanted to be proven wrong, but I was not. And he gave me exactly what I figured he would give. And so again, it was this like, it just felt like a missed opportunity because you're in a room with so many people who are just like, we're sitting here like this, like we're just like eyes open, hearts open, ears open, ready to hear from you. And you're just going to tell us the same old, or just tell us this like unrelated thing. And so that was a little bit of a letdown, just being honest.
Sure. It's interesting.
The last takeaway that I have, and then we can go into maybe if you have any follow-up questions, was on day 2, which was again, maybe something that I gravitated towards day 2 a little bit more. They had, and I can show you this on the diagram for the thing. So as you can see on the screen here, there's the tent that we ate all the food. This is the tent where all of the talks happened. And then they had all these like little tents surrounding the big tent. And those little tents were for breakout sessions. And it was crazy because they set all these tents up and we did breakouts for an hour across the 2 days. Like, again, missed opportunity. We could have done a little bit better there. But they kept things reasonably open in the breakout tents so that we could engage. It was probably 10 of us in each breakout tent, 10 or 15 of us in each breakout tent. And we could engage on whatever topics that we wanted. But one of the women in my specific tent asked a question that led to a conversation that took up the whole hour. And the takeaway that I had, and this kind of mirrored because I asked some other folks, what did you guys talk about in your breakout session? Was that this industry, none of us came away from this conference with all the answers. And what I wrote down in my notes was the breakout groups show that there are still the same problems, but there is a very clear trend I'm noticing on desire to act on the problems, not just sweep them under the rug or ignore them. And 2, a different angle or focus on the solution. And so the topic of our breakout session was, I came up in hard kitchens. That's what the woman said. And I had this tension around the fact that I want high standards in my organization, but I don't want high stress. The next generation is not willing to go through the same trauma that I went through. I have no desire to make the next generation go through the same trauma that I went through, but I still want high standards. I don't want to leave people with scars. I don't want high stress. I'm concerned about how to get to that level while people are pushing back on me and saying, I don't want to listen to that. What's the point of doing some of these XYZ situation? And so I spoke up in a way that I haven't at any other conference, because I was, again, around like-minded people. And I was like, that's why total station domination exists, because it allows you to, at a granular level, show you exactly where you need to potentially perform a little bit better in a way that is not your chef berating you on, be better, you're a shitty cook, just figure it out.
Yeah.
That's why I created that. And so it's like, it's one small stone that I put on the wall in an effort to help. But that was just a macro takeaway. That is, the industry has this hankering, this craving for being better, but we don't have the infrastructure yet. There's not enough tools. There's still a void. We know, and again, that right along rolls with the conference goals. What do we want to remove from the past that we don't enjoy, that we don't maybe want to continue rolling with? But what do we still want to look forward to in the future? And what do we make sure, we want to make sure this part stays. It's okay if this stuff like goes along the wayside and we get rid of that. We never see this rear its ugly head again. But I do want XYZ things. And the thing that came up, and again, was a little bit of a trend or a theme, was I still want to be great. I still want to provide high quality. I still want to have high standards, but I don't want to do it in an abusive way. And so again, I don't have a clear answer, because I provided a solution. And even then it was just kind of like, okay, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, that seems like a lot of work. You know what I mean? That's a new way of thinking about it. But it did make me happy to see that, like, it was just a group of people, because I think, again, 10 years ago, that question would have come up and some chef would have piped up and just said, like, stop being such a pussy. Do you know what I mean? Like, that genuinely would have been something that somebody would have said. But everybody was receptive to this. And this was across, like, men, women, like, young, old, across the spectrum. Everybody was in agreement. In fact, there was this really old woman in the tent who was like, why did we even put up with abuse anymore? Do you know what I mean? Like, she just went on her whole soapbox, like, thing. It was really awesome. But that was just very novel for me to experience. And it was the situation of, like, I felt like I was not the only one who kind of felt that way. And again, it is not a situation of, I want everything to be kumbaya and everybody loves each other. It is, I still want precision and high quality. And you know what I mean? Like, it is not that we just want to be nice all the time. Yes, we want to be nice all the time, but we also want to be nice in service of, pushing maybe the boundaries and doing some innovation and working hard. Like, we want to work hard, but we want to do it in this way that it is not burning people out and causing cruelty.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's been the goal. So it's good to see that, like, the leading minds in that space are at least trying to address it in some way. So I think that's awesome.
Any other big questions? Those are kind of like the ends of my notes. I did speak with one of the board members of MAD while I was there, again, sitting across from lunch at a different meal with this person. And he did pose the question to the table, not just me, but it was, do we want this to be something that happens every year? Does this happen every other year? We don't know. And so I can't directly tell you that this is something that is going to happen in 2026. I certainly hope it does. I don't know if it's going to be a situation where I'm maybe going to be ineligible to go in 2026 because I went this year already. And they want to continue to have new people coming. And again, Ray, if you need it, I will send it to you, but I want to make sure we include the list to MAD's newsletter in case somebody gets to the end of this episode and it's like, I definitely want to make sure that I sign up to hear that stuff. That's where I heard about it. I'm sure on Instagram, it's also a situation that they do. When the applications are open, you have about a month, I think, to apply, or at least I did when I first heard of it. So definitely when you see the news, act on it as quickly as possible. And yeah, I think that's maybe just another tip that I would give is like, I'm in a space now where I focus so much on these topical things, moving the industry forward, having professional experience in the industry already, having a desire to continue to build stuff and engage. And I tried to make that come across in my application to MAD this year. Sure. Obviously, it was successful. I can't point to what, you know what I mean? Maybe having a following was helpful on the internet. I don't know. I don't know what was the most helpful or maybe the qualifying thing. Maybe it was a situation where I just met a number on a list, and once my number would have passed, they would have sent my ticket to somebody else. I don't necessarily know, but it is something that if you are going to apply, I think maybe making some of this known that you're going to be a good culture fit for MAD is also something that I can imagine that they consider, being that they take in an application and they're so curated with the attendees.
No, that's good information to have. And yeah, like I said, we'll have to include the link in the description. I know I feel pretty satisfied with that. I think you just spent the last hour, and I teased it on the last podcast. It's very interesting to see. I appreciate that you came with both information and also how it could be better. And I'd be interested to see the takeaways from it and kind of look to the future on how NOMA and the organizations operate, building off this. So yeah, thank you for sharing all that.
No, of course. And if there's any follow-ups that anybody has, please send them over. I will either include it in a newsletter I'll respond to directly, or maybe if there's like a bajillion questions, we'll maybe do another follow-up. But I think, again, this was a pretty cohesive summary of the experience. I would absolutely go again. And I hope that this not only covered some of the takeaways that I experienced, but then also like how to be a good attendee at these sorts of events, and yeah, just how to think about being engaged with the industry beyond just the place that you're working at. I think that was also really cool to kind of experience in the flesh. And so, yeah, if anybody has further questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll be back with your standard news episode in the next couple days.
One quick bite at before we leave. I know you're about to leave. The report last week I shared about the record amount of young people entering the food industry. Knowing what you know now off of this build to last. I'm messing it up already. Any general thoughts on just be quick. Any general thoughts on the idea that through COVID, through what we thought was going to be an exile out of restaurants, we're going to see, because of how accessible this work is, a vast number of younger people entering the industry. Any general thoughts as that floated across your timeline from this past week?
The way that I'll analogize this is when Ray and I think, were graduating, there was this influx of, this is hard to say it in words, but it's almost like disposable talent, from the sense of they're willing to come in. You don't have to tell them what they're getting paid. You don't have to tell them what the menu is. You don't have to tell them a commitment. You don't have to tell them what their role is going to be. They don't care. They just want the job. And you can run through them really quickly. You can burn them out. You can ask them to work 16-hour days. You can not pay them. You can whatever. And who cares? Because you have 16 other resumes on the chef's desk, that if this person quits, you can have this other person come in, and who cares? Because we also have stagiaires in the back room doing a bunch of prep for us. Ray and I cover on this show the real numbers that the U.S. Department of Labor is projecting for participants in the industry, people deciding that they want to work in food. In the age of AI automating away some of these other roles, I think that it's going to even continue to be a trend, people wanting to work with their hands. And so the numbers tell us one thing, but those numbers don't say the qualities of the people who are coming into this industry. And that, I think, is remarkably different. So it is someone who is much more focused on, I maybe have other hobbies that I'm interested in. I maybe want to make sure that I can put money into my 401k. I maybe want to make sure that I, am working a reasonable number of hours. I maybe want to make sure that I'm learning things on the job, as opposed to just coming in here and I'm gonna extract the fact that I can now put this place on my resume, and I'm gonna give you a middle finger and then on to the next one. I genuinely want to have a relationship with my coworkers. I want to be mentored by my boss. All of these things like maybe existed in this last generation 10 years ago, but I think this new generation, it is like borderline non-negotiable. It is this situation of, I actually am going to decline to work for this place because there's other places down the street that I can go to where they do prioritize this.
Yep.
And what's cool to see is the business owners and the leaders who, again, they have to do some unwinding. Seeing this conversation happen in my breakout session, and is like, they're grappling with this. It's hard. Like, it's not going to happen overnight, but it is something where that trend is starting to have more power. The swell of it is just starting to come. It's starting to break. The wave is coming, and you can definitely feel it in the way of, maybe it's more people, but the people are not the same. You know what I mean? They're not as short-term minded, which is why I love the theme of the conference. Again, I don't think that there is like an exact framework. It's why I put out some of the industry reports, both on this show and then some of our partners that we work with, doing some really good work, talking about some of these trends. Because if we want to have we want to be able to deliver really high quality experiences to guests, it does turn into this situation where we need people to do that. We're not at a place where we can just have a robot army doing stuff for us. And so you got to kind of like listen to some of those things. And what's really cool is like, you see some of these organizations that decide to prioritize this, those are the winners. Those are the people who are like crushing it right now. And they've had to make changes, and I can imagine it's been incredibly painful. Like the amount of like sleepless nights that Renee has probably gotten when all of this stuff was like really going down, like with the New York Times article and all of the people coming out and, you know, like shaming him and all this stuff, is probably really hard. But you look at like so happy, like the people are so happy, you know what I mean? Like working at Noma, you know what I mean? Now,
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's not hard, but it's like he has an incredible amount of longevity in his team. And I think that that is admirable. Not the fact that he, you know, obviously, like, let's criticize the bad. But what I think you and I, Ray, have talked about is like, if you don't give somebody an opportunity to go through this redemption arc and actually be better in the future, then it's kind of like we've really done a disservice. And now that person is just like, quote unquote, on the sidelines. They're canceled. This is like a ton of potential and talent that now our industry is never going to be able to benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's like the thing, how I would think about young people coming in now. It's like they have things that they want in not a way that I don't think I had when I was kind of coming up. I kind of just had to take what I was able to get.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they get everything that they want. And so I want to make sure I make that very clear of like, don't sit down from your potential boss and say like, I'm not going to take this job unless you give me this list of 8 things that I need to have in this organization. Be willing to be flexible with like, I have a couple priorities. I'm going to make them known. I'm going to communicate with my boss. I'm going to be, you know, much more open with some of this stuff. And so I know that we maybe wanted this to be quick, but I again, it's something that was like percolating in my mind of, you know, I haven't maybe solidified it too hard, but I think it's important. Like, I think it's like, if we want to continue to have great organizations, we have to be focusing on like who's coming in. Like if we cut that off at the knees, you know what I mean? It's a crucial part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it's all going to die if we don't focus on it. And it is changing. And so can't bury your head in the sand like an ostrich and ignore it. Because to the thing that I was saying, like if you're a great organization, you're going to attract the best talent. And it's like, that's going to allow you to do the things that you want to do.
And if you're an operator in the space and you don't set the standard, someone with lower standard will, and will end up repelling all those people away.
That's right.
So there's always going to be someone that does that as well. And so
totally.
You can always be that person that doesn't do that. It makes it different. So just a thought.
Thanks for being here, man. Thanks for great questions. And we'll see everybody next week.
See you guys.